Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to finish up Chapter 1 as we look at a couple of other aspects of leadership, one being agile leadership. Agile leadership is something that we have evolved into from the basic theories to where we're at right now. And also we're going to take a look at derailment. Maybe you've known someone who was put in a leadership position prematurely, or they were put in a leadership position and didn't do very well, wasn't able to perform up to the standards of the organization. That's called derailment. And we're going to take a look at some of the characteristics that lead to derailment, and hopefully we can avoid those ourselves. So let's go ahead and get started in these finishing segments of Chapter 1, What Does It Mean to Be a Leader? Welcome back, class, and today we're going to continue on with Chapter 1. Actually, we're going to finish that out today as we continue on with the evolution of leadership, and we're going to be taking a look at some more processes as it pertains to leadership styles. If you remember yesterday, we looked at some of the theories, early theories of leadership, and what you see here in Exhibit 1.4 is really the eras, the time frames in which these styles of leadership really evolved and emerged, and why they emerged the way they did. For instance, Era 1, if you see here in the lower left-hand column or lower left-hand quadrant, you had the great person leadership. Now, if you take a look at the scope here and the environment here, you'll see that individuality was pretty much the way things were, and it was a stable environment. This is the pre-industrial, pre-bureaucratic stage where the companies were very small, so small that one person could lead the company, and oftentimes these companies were comprised of family members and people that the person knew. So in this context, this type of leadership would have worked because the person's ability to think, the person's ability to multitask and so forth within a small realm was within reasonable expectations. However, as things changed, we move here to Era 2. Era 2 is rational management. Now organizations became bigger, so much so that one person couldn't really manage it effectively. So as the companies grew, so too did the way that leaders regarded the way that the processes and structures should be in place. So what we see here are some of the characteristics. We see here vertical hierarchy, and that means there's a top, middle, and lower section to an organization. Bureaucracy. That means the organization was run by procedures and protocol and rules and so forth. Functional management. What do we need to do to get the job done? And here we see, if you remember me speaking yesterday about the autocratic method, the autocratic method was let's do what's necessary to obtain or achieve our goals. However, the worker was really not a viable resource to gain information and to gain innovation from. They were just tools. So the rational management, you see stability here as you did in the first one, but also from an individual standpoint, you're looking at it from an organization perspective instead of just an individual perspective. So the focus here was rules, regulations, and we needed multiple people to be able to run these organizations now because they've grown. Now let's move over here to Era 3 where we have the turbulent section. And as your textbook talks about here, this era was marked by instability. They're turbulent times now. And back in the 70s, your book talks about OPEC and some of the oil embargoes and global things that were going on that affected organizations. Also, we saw the rise in Japanese competition, and the Japanese, from a technology standpoint, they were dominating the world. because of their superior quality, because of their leadership, and so forth. So we had to move from just a rule-based type of structure, do as I say, and period, to more along the lines now of trying to influence people. And you had cross-functional teams, as you see here as a characteristic of that. You had horizontal organization, where you tried to flatten the organization a little bit, decrease the distance between upper management and the worker, and so forth. So this really caused this era, the third era, really tried to emphasize the team, or what we call lateral leadership. Now, Era 4 we see here, and that's typified now by the agile leadership, and that's giving up some of that control. This is where we see terms like empowerment. Empowerment is the ability of the worker to be able to make decisions, for them to be able to take control of their situation and to be able to obtain objectives and achieve goals, doing it with their ingenuity and resources and so forth. So we've tried to loosen the reins and give them autonomy in being able to meet organizational objectives. And this is also typified today by the social media, technology age, and all of that. So today we are more involved in, as you see here, relationship, where we're trying to foster and facilitate people. And also here, as you see, facilitate change and adaptation. So change is the buzzword today, where we are having to constantly evolve, redefine ourselves, and so forth to be able to meet the demands of a technologically advanced world, a global economy, diversity, and technology. All of these things have made us really evolve into the agile leadership. And what is agile leadership? Well, as we said a while ago, it's giving up control in the traditional sense and encouraging the growth and development of others to ensure organizational flexibility and responsiveness. Now, what does that mean by giving up control? Well, the boss is still the boss. The CEO is still the CEO, and so forth. However, we've realized today that if we develop the workers, if we nurture them, if we facilitate their skills, being able to identify, hone in, develop them, then they're going to be much more productive workers than what we had in the previous eras. So what we have today are what we call learning organizations. Learning organizations are those organizations who really facilitate agile leadership. They're not there to crack a whip over a person or to just bark orders. They're there to find what that person needs to be fully developed and resource that person with whatever is needed so they can obtain that end. And then once they've reached that pinnacle of readiness and ability, then they're going to be the most productive workers that you've ever had, because and it's going to free you up to do other things because you're not there having to stand over them telling them every little step to make. So it's very liberating. It is very encouraging for the workers, and it's just a good way of being able to meet the demands today in a global, technically advanced, diversified environment. Now, derailment. Derailment happens when a manager who has all of the technical skills and intelligence and abilities, they can rise up and have a stellar career. But when you put them in positions of leadership where they have to exercise those soft skills such as communication, empathy, emotional intelligence, and so forth, they really can't do that. And you might know some people who are very smart. They know what they are supposed to do. They are very good workers, highly intelligent, but yet they're just not people. It's hard for them to relate to others. And that would be an example of a person who If you put them in positions where they had to relate to people, they would fail because there's a mismatch, as you see here, between the job needs and the personal skills and qualities that job requires. So derailment is really putting a person out of their environment, like a fish out of water. I remember a story one time of a UPS driver who did a great job. He was always there on time. He was rarely ever late for an appointment or to deliver packages and so forth. He had a stellar record of performance. So he was targeted for a management position. So when an opportunity came, they made him a supervisor. And within 2 months, he told them, either make me a driver or I quit. And they were asking him, what happened? Well, he said, the people that I used to hang out with, my fellow drivers, the ones who I used to go bowling with and the ones who I used to talk to and used to hang out with and all of that, we no longer have that relationship. Now I'm their boss, and their whole dynamic has changed. I'm not the same person at work because I have to be in charge, and because of that, I really don't have that intimacy or that friendship that I used to have. And he said, and the job really is not worth it for me to have to surrender that. So putting a person in that position is really fatal to that person's career. So there is something that we call in organizational behavior and in staffing, we have the person job fit and the person organization fit. The person job fit means that the person has the qualifications, the hard technical qualifications, such as a bachelor's degree, typing 40 words a minute maybe, some of the hard skills that you can measure. But the other person-organization match means that the person's personality, demeanor, values, and so forth fit that culture, and they can assimilate into that. And here's what derailment really comes into play with that. You may have a person who is technically qualified. They may have experience. They may have knowledge and skills. But if they lack the ability to foster those soft skills, such as empathy and emotional intelligence and so forth, then chances are they're going to fail. And what's going to be the end result? Well, they can be demoted, which is always a morale, really a kick to their morale. They could be fired. They could be transferred. None of those outcomes are pleasant. And if we would have just left the person where they were, they would still be highly productive. So we need to be able to screen people, not just with hard skills, but to also kind of screen them for those soft skills, those skills that are going to be needed to be able to endear people to them, because if they can't do that, they're not going to be effective leaders, and you've pretty much sabotaged their career. Now, there are 5 fatal flaws that cause derailment. Performance problem, failing to meet our business objectives because of too much time promoting themselves and playing politics, failure to fulfill promises, or a lack of attention to priorities. So these are the individuals who fail because they're really not able to focus on the job. Again, they're trying to press palms with people, getting to know people, playing politics, all of that kind of stuff will derail you. Problems with relationships, being insensitive, manipulative, critical, and not trustworthy in relationships. These things can kill you, especially from a leadership position. Now, you can be a manager and not have to worry about relationships as much. Now, you'll always have to deal with it to a certain extent. But a manager can manage without having to garner the loyalty and the cohesion and the unity of the people. The leader does that. But for a leader has to be able to do these things. Now, difficulty changing And that's not learning from feedback and mistakes, changing old behaviors. Again, I'm a pastor, and I've also been in business. I'm a business professional today as well. And it's very difficult sometimes to change, even when you see the writing on the wall. I had a person come into my office, my church's office as the pastor, and this person had an oxygen mask on, and the person was talking about how, he was upset about smoking and all of that, and the person walked outside after and started smoking a cigarette. So change, even though people know it's necessary, they're reluctant to do that. And here's my little formula. If you see it anywhere else, I'll tell you they stole it from me. But what I've learned over the years when it comes to change, no one is going to change anything unless they are disturbed enough about the way things are, or the status quo as we call it. This is why people will stay in abusive relationships. They'll tell you, I hate this, I can't stand being with this person, or this person is abusing me, and this, that, and the other. But yet they won't leave. Even though they're upset, they're not upset enough to change their situation. It happens in relationships, it happens with addictions, it happens in business and so forth. I was called to be a advisor for a college that used to exist here in Memphis, and they were going downhill. Every sign pointed to their ultimate demise. And there were things that they needed to change that I had pointed out. Even though they knew they needed to change, they refused to do it, and they're no longer here. So change has it's necessary today, but when you're dealing with change, you're dealing with people's human nature and their reluctance to change the way things are because they're comfortable with the way things are. They know the rules, and they can live in a world they understand being the way things are. But when you change all that, you take it all away. And then difficulty building and leading a team. Teams are very productive. They're beneficial if they're used the right way. But it takes time and work putting a team together and being able to get them to function the way that you want them to function. So being able to develop teams and lead teams, especially with diversity today, that's a challenge. So that's the fourth flaw. And also too narrow management experience. And that's the inability to work effectively or collaborate outside their current functions. And that's the inability to see the big picture. And part of your job, and I won't say a fairly new concept, it's just common sense for most people, but really your effectiveness is going to will be really much judged by your ability to be able to step away from the trees and see the forest, to be able to see the big picture. Now that's what we call systems thinking, and we'll talk about systems thinking here a little bit later on. But what systems thinking means is that nothing happens in a vacuum. What you do will affect someone else. What they do will affect someone else. And what someone else does will eventually come back to affect you. You need to see the organization and the church as a whole. It's not just a collection of individual entities. You are all one big structure, an organic structure. And what I mean by organic is that you are living. That organization is going to respond to how the organisms interact and how they perform. So it's that way in church. It's that way in business. I had a song director one time who really was not very effective in dealing with people. Now, he could sing and he knew music and all of that, but yet his disposition was off-putting. People really didn't like him as a person. And a lot of times he would get before the congregation and put a bad taste in their mouth. We're going to sing this and this, that, and the other. So I've had to talk to him a couple of times, but I explained to him one time, brother, your job is to prepare the table, and my job is to feed them. And if you, starting out, have already ruined their appetite, then you've really made my job harder. You've made it very difficult for a person to respond to the gospel. So that's how this stuff pans out in ministry. If you have a youth minister who is not effectively teaching the youth, guess what? Those parents are going to be upset, and they're going to come into the congregation upset. They're not going to be able to worship. Same goes for children or any other ministry. If maintenance is not making sure that the temperature is right, people are going to be complaining, and they're going to focus on how hot they are or how cold they are through the whole service. So there's no such thing as people operating in a vacuum independent of the whole organization. Every person, no matter who they are or what they do, whether it's church or whether it's business, will affect the overall performance of that organization. So these are some concepts that you need to understand, and these are some of the flaws that you want to be able to avoid if you're going to be an effective leader. Now finally, we see here in Exhibit 1.6, learning to be a leader. And just take a look at this and read in your textbook, practice leadership in your everyday life. You know, Jesus didn't just tell his disciples about leadership, he practiced it. So that's the starting point. And then emulate successful leaders. Who do you admire who are great leaders? What was it about them that you believe made them successful leaders? If they are people that have been successful, whether it's in ministry or business, then start to study them. What did they do? What were their characteristics? How did they lead? What were the behaviors that they exhibited? And that will help illuminate you. Find a mentor to provide feedback. You know, that's what Jesus was to the disciples, and it's still good today. Find people who can give you advice, who can help you come along. I tell you, when I first started out as a pastor, I didn't have a mentor. I had to learn through hard knocks, and I have more bruises and scrapes, and I know things would have been a lot easier had I had a pastor that I could have gone to who could have said, brother, you're doing good in this or you're doing bad in that, and I would pay attention to this, and this is how, I have been able to overcome these challenges and all of that. Folks, I wish I would have had that. So whatever your vocation or calling may be, take advantage of the mentors that God may bring your way to be able to help enliven and enrich you. Complete a leadership course. That's what this is. And hopefully you'll be able to learn some of the principles that really are the foundation for leadership. Work to develop personal traits of empathy and patience. That's something that I believe all of us have to work at. I believe today we're just impatient. Everything is automatic and it's immediate. And that's not necessarily going to be the case when it comes to people. So work at these things. Take a look at the traits of people who are effective leaders and work at emulating them. And again, the best resource that we have, the best example that we have comes from the Bible, and that example is Jesus Christ. So be more Christ-like. It's not only going to make you a more well-rounded leader, it's going to give you the resources that you need to be able to handle people, environments, and situations as they arise. No one plans for failure, but failure occurs often, not only in business but also in ministry. Today you saw some of the characteristics of derailment. Sometimes the person just does not fit the position. Part of our job as responsible business leaders and ministers in church is to identify those who have that potential and to nourish them so that derailment doesn't happen. And you can see in the Bible how everybody wanted King Saul to take over and to be the king, but we know that he was not really cut out for that position. He essentially, spiritually, derailed. And that's what we want to avoid in our ministries and in our businesses. Well, I hope you've had a good first week. We're going to continue on next week with Chapter 2. So have a good, safe, blessed weekend, and we'll see you next Tuesday.